The night was colder than usual. The wind howled through the trees, carrying whispers of something unknown. I sat alone in my small home, staring at the empty fireplace, the embers long dead, the silence thick, like a heavy fog pressing against my skin. Then I heard it, a soft thud against my door, something weak, something desperate. My heart pounded as I approached. Slowly my hands, shaking as they gripped the doorknob, I opened it, and there she was. A figure collapsed on the ground, her limbs thin, her skin a shade of blue that glowed faintly in the dim porch light. Her eyes fluttered open and met mine, filled with the silent plea for help. She shivered uncontrollably, her breath ragged. I could see the exhaustion in every part of her body. She was barely holding on. Without thinking, I reached down and lifted her. She was lighter than she should have been, as if she had been starving for days, maybe longer. I carried her inside, closing the door with my foot, shielding her from the cold. I laid her on my couch, rushing to grab the thickest blanket I had. I wrapped it around her. She flinched at first, but then melted into its warmth. Her eyes closed again, but I could see she was still conscious, barely awake. She was weak. I needed to help her. But how? What do you give to someone who isn't human? What do they eat? How do they heal? My mind raced, but then my instincts took over. I brought her water first, holding the cup to her lips. She took small, hesitant sips, then more eagerly, as if realizing how thirsty she was. I didn't have much food that night, just a bit of bread, some leftover soup. I hesitated, but offered it to her. She looked at it uncertain, her long, delicate fingers brushing over the bowl. She brought it close, sniffed it, then took a small sip, her expression unreadable, but she drank it all slowly, methodically. When she finished, she met my eyes again. Something in her gaze softened. She was still afraid, still weak, but there was something else. Gratitude, trust. She tried to speak, her lips parted, but the sound that came was soft, melodic, a language I didn't understand. But I could feel the meaning behind it. A thank you, a question, a plea. I nodded, hoping she would understand that she was safe here. Days passed, and she grew stronger. She still didn't speak my language, and I didn't speak hers. But we found ways to communicate simple gestures, expressions. She stayed close, watching everything I did, curiosity in her luminous eyes. When I cooked, she observed intently. When I moved about the house, she followed cautiously, like a shadow, learning, adapting. She ate more now, her frail frame filling out. Her skin, once dull and ashen, now glowed with a soft vibrancy. I could see her regaining strength. She even smiled once, a brief, fleeting thing, but real. One night she reached out, touched my hand, her fingers cool but not unpleasant. She looked at me with something unspoken, something deeper than words. I understood. She was thanking me, she was trusting me. Over time, the fear in her eyes faded, replaced by something warmer, something like belonging. She started to help around the house clumsily at first, but with growing confidence. She learned my habits, my routines, and I learned hers. She had strange ways of doing things, movements that felt otherworldly but fascinating. One evening, as the sun set, casting golden light through the windows, she pointed to herself, then to me, then placed a hand over her heart. Her lips moved, forming a sound, soft yet meaningful. Family. I didn't need to understand her language to know what she meant. In that moment, I knew she wasn't just a guest anymore. She wasn't a stranger. She was family. Months passed, and she adapted more and more. She learned my words bit by bit, stringing together sentences, sometimes imperfect, but always heartfelt. I learned her name, a series of sounds too complex for my tongue to replicate, but she smiled when I tried and settled for a name we both could say. She was no longer a lost soul at my door. She was someone who belonged. Then one day, she told me she had to leave. She had to return to where she came from. Her people were waiting for her. She had been searching for a way back, and now she had found it. I felt my heart clench at the thought of losing her, but I understood. She had a home, a life beyond this place. We stood by the edge of the woods, where a strange, shimmering portal flickered in the air. She looked at me one last time, her luminous eyes filled with emotions too deep to name. She stepped forward, then hesitated, turned back, and embraced me, her arms cool but comforting. A silent goodbye. Then she was gone. The portal vanished. The house felt empty once more. But I was not the same anymore. I had gained something more than just a fleeting connection. I had found family. And even if she was no longer here, I knew she carried a piece of me with her, just as I carried a piece of her.